There are places that seem to carry the energy of the events that took place there, as if the walls themselves could retain dark memories. I was never the type to believe in that, at least not until that night. It was supposed to be a simple celebration, a special Valentine's evening. Lucas and I just wanted to disconnect from our routine, find a quiet spot, and enjoy the moment together. When he suggested an isolated motel on the side of the road, I admit I hesitated. The flickering sign, the eerie silence in the area around us, everything felt like a cliché straight out of a cheap horror story. But I eventually gave in, thinking my discomfort was just in my head. However, from the moment we walked through the doors of room 13, something inside me knew there was something wrong with that place. What was supposed to be a romantic night quickly turned into a nightmare I'll never forget. What we discovered in that room didn't just haunt us, it made us question whether it's possible to escape a past that never rested. This is the story of our fight to survive in a place where love had turned into a deadly prison. The road seemed to stretch on forever. It was one of those nights when the world felt submerged in an unsettling silence, as if something was about to happen. I was driving, while Lucas, sitting beside me, talked about how special our night at the motel he had booked would be. It was Valentine's Day, and I was excited to spend some alone time with him, away from the routine and people. After a few miles on empty roads, we finally spotted the motel's sign. The lights flickered irregularly, and some letters were burned out, making the name almost illegible. Lucas laughed, trying to lighten the mood, but I already felt a slight discomfort. The place was isolated, surrounded by trees that seemed to swallow everything around it. When we parked, I didn't see any other cars in the lot. As we walked into the reception, a thin man with a vacant look greeted us. He seemed nervous, like he wanted to say something but hesitated. "Room 13, he said, sliding the key across the desk. His eyes lingered on me for a moment too long, sending a chill down my spine. I tried to ignore it, but there was something about his posture that bothered me deeply. The room was at the end of the hallway, and the walk there was shrouded in a near suffocating silence. When we finally opened the door, the air was cold, as if the heater had been turned off for days. The faint smell of mildew was present, and the walls seemed covered with a thin layer of dust. A large mirror occupied almost the entire wall across from the bed. "Okay, this definitely needs some renovation," Lucas joked as he tossed his backpack onto the chair next to the bed. I forced a laugh, trying to ignore the feeling that something wasn't right. While he fiddled with the TV, which was emitting static, I began to explore the room. There was a dark stain on the carpet near the bed, but I decided not to mention it. I was trying to relax when I noticed that the mirror was fogged up, as if someone had just breathed on it. I furrowed my brow, but before I could think too much about it, Lucas called me. "Hey, it's not that bad, right?" He smiled, and I forced a smile back. Maybe I was just tired. I was trying to get used to the room, but there was something in the air that wouldn't let me relax. It felt like the air was heavier, as if each breath was a little harder than it should be. Lucas, on the other hand, was comfortable. He was lying on the bed, flipping through channels on the remote while I paced around the room, restless. "You're really tense," he said, not taking his eyes off the screen, which for some reason was flickering between channels and static. "Try to relax, Anna. It's just a motel like any other," but it didn't feel like it. As he spoke, I heard a strange sound coming from the bathroom. It was like a faint dripping, persistent, even though I was sure the faucet was turned off. I went to check. When I entered, I noticed that the mirror was fogged up again, but this time, there was something different. An irregular pattern seemed to have been drawn on it, something that faded away slowly, as if it had just been written. I ran my hand across the glass but couldn't make out anything. "Lucas, did you hear that?" I asked, my voice trembling a little more than I wanted it to. He laughed. "What? You're hearing things. Relax." But I knew I wasn't imagining it. Things started to pile up. First, the lamp next to the bed flickered a few times before going out completely. Then, while we were talking, we heard a noise in the hallway, like heavy footsteps going back and forth. Lucas got up, opened the door, and looked outside. Nothing. Just the empty hallway lit by flickering fluorescent lights. Must be someone trying to scare us, he said, but for the first time I noticed a hint of doubt in his voice. He was starting to get unsettled too. I returned to the bathroom to try to calm down. This time, when I looked in the mirror, there was no doubt. The message was clear. Leave. My heart raced and I immediately called Lucas. By the time he arrived, the message had disappeared. You need to sleep, Anna, he said, trying to reassure me. But now it was him who seemed tense. Something was wrong, and we both knew it. The silence in the room seemed louder by the second. The unease wouldn't let me be, and the feeling that something was terribly wrong with that place grew with every passing second. While Lucas tried to sleep, claiming I was just paranoid, I sat on the edge of the bed with my phone, determined to find out more about the motel. I searched for the name of the place, which was partially visible on the sign at the entrance, along with the word history in the search bar. The oldest result was a newspaper article from years ago. As I read, my body froze. The article described a brutal crime that had taken place in the exact room we were staying in, the infamous Room 13. A couple had rented the space for a romantic night, but what started as a passionate encounter ended in tragedy. The man, driven by obsessive jealousy, strangled the woman and then took his own life. The article said that the staff had heard screams that night, but when they arrived, it was too late. Since then, no one liked to stay in room 13, and rumors of strange occurrences spread, scaring off guests. I stared at the phone screen, my heart racing. The most chilling detail was a photo attached to the article. The murdered woman looked disturbingly similar to me. The same long brown hair, the same height. It was like looking into a reflection from another time. Lucas, look at this, I called, showing him the article, but he barely glanced at it. It's just an urban legend. Motels always have these stories to scare tourists. I tried to believe him, but the feeling of being watched made me shiver. That's when a loud noise made me jump out of bed. A picture had fallen off the wall, revealing something behind it. Lucas approached, curious, and pulled the picture completely aside. Behind it, there were scratch marks on the wall, as if someone had used their nails to write something. The words were worn and hard to read, but one phrase was clear. He's still here. Lucas tried to act like it meant nothing, but I could see on his face that he was starting to give in. The TV turned on by itself again, this time emitting a disturbing static while the lights in the room flickered uncontrollably. Lucas turned off the TV and went to the bathroom, but came back pale. There's something wrong, he finally admitted. The message in the mirror. I saw it now. It's there again. I felt a wave of terror, but also a growing determination. We needed to leave that place, but something told me it wouldn't be that simple. I grabbed my phone and took a picture of the scratch marks on the wall, hoping to understand better what had been written. When I looked at the image on the screen, I saw something that hadn't been there before. A face behind me reflected in the mirror. I could barely breathe. The face in the mirror seemed to watch every move I made, but when I turned around, there was nothing there. Lucas tried to reassure me, but his voice trembled. Maybe it's just a reflection or some dirt, he murmured. But we both knew that wasn't true. Something was with us in the room, and that presence grew stronger with every passing minute. The lights began to flicker again, and the TV turned on by itself. This time, the static on the screen seemed to form shadows that moved, distorted, as if trying to come out of the screen. The sound of the static grew louder, filling the room in an unbearable way. I tried to turn it off, but the button wouldn't respond. Lucas pulled the plug, but the TV stayed on, with the shadows on the screen becoming more defined. That's when we heard a scream. Not a normal scream, but one filled with pain, as if someone was being hurt right there. This can't be happening, Lucas whispered, backing up next to me. The floor started to vibrate slightly, and then we heard something even worse. Footsteps, slow and heavy, coming from the hallway. It sounded like someone was approaching the door. Loud, rhythmic banging echoed through the room. Lucas ran to the door, but no matter how hard he pulled, it wouldn't open. "We're locked in," he shouted. I went to the bed and grabbed the diary I had found under the mattress earlier, something I had thought was strange at the time, but now it made sense. It was small and stained, with pages written in an irregular way, as if the person writing it was desperate. I began to flip through it quickly, reading each page. When I came across the last entry, I felt my blood run cold. It was a message written by someone who had stayed there, someone who had lived the same experience we were going through. It said, "Room 13 has no escape. Once you are inside, the past keeps you prisoner, and there is no way out until it is satisfied." The last word was underlined several times. Stay. That's when the door to the bathroom slammed open and a shadow crossed the room. It was no longer just an idea or a sensation, it was real. The shadow was taking form, a figure that was watching us from the corner of the room. Before I could say anything, it lunged at me. I felt a cold breath on my neck and heard a voice whispering, faint and angry, "You shouldn't have come." I've never been good with dates. I've always preferred chatting online where words flow without pressure, where I can think before responding and at least appear more interesting than I actually am. So, when I met Helen on the app, I felt comfortable. Our conversations were easy, like we'd known each other for years. She seemed so perfect, smart, funny, with a sense of humor that made me laugh even in the most unexpected moments. In the first few weeks, we exchanged messages almost constantly. She always replied quickly, always interested in the things I said. Sometimes it was hard to believe someone could care that much. That's when the idea of meeting in person came up. At first, she was cautious. "I'm not rushing, just want to make sure we click in real life too," she said. I thought that made sense. After all, who wouldn't be nervous before a date? I knew it had to happen, so I suggested a cafe downtown, a quiet spot where we could talk without hurry. But as the days went by, something began to bother me. Her responses started taking longer. The messages became shorter, like she was in a rush, leaving me with a strange feeling in my chest. I tried to ignore it. After all, it was probably just a coincidence, right? Maybe she was busy. Maybe she was working too much. It wasn't until the night before our date that the anxiety really hit. She said she was excited, but also a bit nervous. I felt the same way. And no matter how much I tried to convince myself everything was fine, an uncomfortable feeling overtook me. I couldn't ignore that something felt different anymore. At the time of our meeting, I got ready and headed to the cafe. It was located downtown, a bit off the busy streets. I expected a calm place with few people, perfect for a first date. But when I arrived, what I found was very different from what I had imagined. The place was nearly empty. Just the barista, a tired-looking man, and a couple sitting at a table in the back. The cafe, usually full of voices and laughter, was immersed in an unusual silence. And Helen wasn't there. I sent her a message asking if she was on her way. Nothing. I sent another message, nothing. I looked at the clock. She was late, and I started wondering if something had happened. But more than that, something didn't feel right. The atmosphere of the place seemed off. The clock on the wall had stopped, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't focus on anything except that deep silence. I kept waiting, feeling that every passing minute made me more uneasy. I knew Helen would show up. Or did I? I couldn't be sure anymore. I didn't know what was happening. I looked around, trying to see if she had sent me any messages, but nothing. No updates, no sign. Then I decided to try calling her. The calls went straight to voicemail. A feeling of panic began to spread through me. What was going on? Why wasn't Helen there? I sent one last message. "Where are you?" "We're at the agreed time." No reply. The silence in the cafe was deafening. Sometimes when the mind starts to deceive you, it makes small sounds seem louder, more pronounced. The clinking of cups, the sound of steam coming from the coffee machine, the rustling of paper, all of it seemed to echo in my head. I looked at the clock again. Almost 15 minutes late, but something still didn't feel right. I glanced at the barista, who seemed unaware of the world around him. He was cleaning the counter, but his eyes were fixed on some distant point, like he was in a trance. I realized he hadn't said a word the entire time. He was just going about his work mechanically, as if time passed differently for him. I tried to push those thoughts aside. Helen would come. She had to. As much as my mind told me to leave, something inside me insisted I should. Wait a little longer. Maybe she was stuck in traffic, or maybe she got confused about the location. It happened, right? I tried to convince myself that everything would be fine, and for a moment, I even thought maybe I was overreacting. It was just a delay. I looked, again at the couple in the back of the cafe. They seemed so absorbed in their own conversation, so unaware of my situation, that I felt even more out of place. The place was becoming more and more desolate, colder. The light in the cafe was dim, almost as if the energy was being drained from the space. I looked at the clock again. It was still stopped at the same time. I didn't understand. This was impossible. A chill ran down my spine. How could a clock in the middle of the cafe's hours just stop like that? The place seemed stranger and stranger, but I was determined to stay. I tried calling Helen again, sent another message. Nothing. But the feeling that something was wrong grew stronger, every second feeling heavier. Then, as I looked at the counter where the barista stood, I noticed something odd. His phone was sitting there, vibrating, as if waiting for someone to pick it up. It wasn't my phone, but the vibration was so distinct that it was impossible not to hear. The ringtone was familiar, but he was so absorbed in his work that he seemed oblivious. The sound felt out of sync, almost like it was coming from somewhere far away. I hesitated, but walked over to grab the phone. It was unlocked. What was even stranger was that the screen displayed a notification. When I looked closer, my stomach turned. It was a text message. Not mine. Definitely not mine. It was from Helen. A message that seemed to have been sent recently. But when I read the content, panic took over me. The message read, "You shouldn't be here, Lucas. I warned you. You're in the wrong place." I froze, my fingers trembling. I didn't know what to do. How did Helen know my name? How did she know I was here? And why was she warning me in such a strange way? The phone vibrated again, and this time an even more disturbing sound followed, the ringtone for a call. I looked at the screen and saw I was receiving a call from an unknown number. My heart raced. Could it be Helen? It couldn't be. She'd never call from a number like this. The decision was automatic. I answered. On the other side of the line, I heard heavy breathing, as if someone was waiting to speak. I couldn't understand much, but what I did hear was enough to leave me speechless. "You shouldn't be here." Looked around. The atmosphere felt like it was closing in on me, as if the air had thickened. With each passing second, the place seemed to transform. No longer just a cafe, but something else. Something strange. As if time and space itself were being manipulated by a force beyond comprehension. "Who are you?" I managed to ask, my voice shaking. The breathing on the other end grew heavier, like it was drawing closer. "You don't understand. You should never have come." I hung up instantly. The silence returned, even heavier than before. The clock on the wall was still frozen. The barista seemed completely unaware, and the couple in the back of the cafe was now staring at me with a strange, empty smile. I was trapped in a place I couldn't comprehend. A place where time was broken, where people didn't move the way they should, and where Helen never existed. That strange feeling wouldn't leave me. I still held Helen's phone, now turned off, in my hand. The fact that she had sent me that message before the call only made things more incomprehensible. "You shouldn't be here." What did that mean? It was as if I had been warned about something much bigger than just a missed date. I wanted to leave, but somewhere deep in my mind, I knew I couldn't just walk away. Something was happening and I needed to understand. I walked up to the cafe door trying to open it, but the handle was cold, almost like it had been frozen. There was no sign of anyone locking the door, but it was impenetrable. I went to the windows, banging on them hard, but they remained intact. No signs of impact. There was no way out. The silence in the place was overwhelming. The barista, still showing no sign of noticing my growing anxiety, was completely absorbed in his task. now working with a coffee machine as if in a trance. He never looked at me. I began to wonder if he even saw me at all. Helen's phone, now silent in my hands, bothered me. I knew I couldn't stay there, but something was pulling me back to the device, something I couldn't explain. It was like it had something more to say to me. Without thinking too much, I decided to unlock it. It wasn't a rational move, I knew, but I needed answers. When I looked at the screen, my heart almost stopped. There was a new message, one that hadn't been there before. The screen glowed coldly, as if calling me to it. "Lucas, you're trapped. You can't leave. Time isn't what it seems." I froze for a moment. What did that mean? Time isn't what it seems? What was Helen trying to tell me? I needed to understand. I had to understand. The thought that this message hadn't come from Helen, but from something much darker, began to form in my mind. I had to get out of there. I had to return to the real world. That's when I noticed the barista was no longer alone. The couple who had been sitting at the back was now standing near the door, silently observing me. Their faces, blank and expressionless, seemed to convey only one message. It was too late. Too late for what? Too late to escape? The phone rang again. This time the call was not from Helen. It was from an unknown number. I never imagined that Valentine's Day could be so perfect. Helena and I had been together for 2 years, and we decided to celebrate the day in a special way. We found an exclusive party at a fancy hotel, with everything a couple could wish, for candles, flowers, hearts everywhere, and soft music filling the air, creating a magical atmosphere. Everything was set for the most romantic night of our lives. With every step we took, the lights twinkled, and the place seemed to radiate happiness. Helena was stunning. Her red dress stood out under the soft lighting, and her eyes sparkled in a way I couldn't take my eyes off her. She looked perfect, and I felt like the luckiest man in the world. That night, everything felt just right. We chatted excitedly with other couples, had fun dancing, and with every smile from her, my heart beat faster. "What a wonderful night, isn't it?" she whispered in my ear as we stepped away from the dance floor for a moment, feeling the energy of the party. I never thought Valentine's Day could be so perfect. I agreed, wrapping my arms around her waist. I looked around and took a deep breath, feeling thankful. The hotel had amazing decor, full of red flowers intertwining in every corner. The place was so well planned that it felt like a modern fairy tale, and I was living that fairy tale with the woman I loved. "You're the best part of this night," I said, smiling and giving her a kiss on the forehead. I can't remember any moment better than this. Helena smiled and her eyes sparkled like never before. But despite all the romantic vibes, something felt off. It was subtle, something I couldn't identify, but it made me feel uneasy. A strange look from one of the guests nearby, a forced smile from another person who walked past us quickly. It was as if the atmosphere was too perfect to be real. Trying to push those thoughts away, I looked back at Helena, and her eyes smiled back at me. It was impossible to imagine that anything could go wrong that night. The party continued, and the couples around us seemed completely immersed in the love and joy of the evening. I wondered if I was just exaggerating my concerns. After all, Valentine's Day is a night of celebration, not fear. "I'm going to grab something to drink. Stay here, okay?" Helena said before walking out of my view. She disappeared into the crowd of people moving around the ballroom. I didn't think she'd be gone long, so I decided to wait there, admiring the surroundings. Everything seemed perfect. Still, an odd feeling wouldn't leave me. A feeling that something was about to happen, something I couldn't predict. I kept watching the environment around me, but as time passed, I realized I couldn't see Helena anymore. She hadn't returned. I searched for her among the groups of guests, but I couldn't find her. I looked toward the door she had gone through, and a growing sense of discomfort took over me. Something was wrong, and I didn't know what it was. I went back to the bar and asked the bartender if he had seen Helena. He looked at me vaguely as if trying to remember, but he couldn't give me any answer. No one seemed to know where she was. My heart started to race. I forced myself to think, logically. Maybe she had just gone to the bathroom or gotten lost in the crowd, but something in me couldn't ignore the feeling that there was more to this place than met the eye. With increasing worry, I headed down the hotel corridors, trying to calm myself. The once perfect soft music now seemed a bit louder, more dissonant, and the lights began to flicker faintly. Suddenly, I saw something that made me stop in the middle of the hall. A letter. It was a folded sheet, placed on top of an empty table, seemingly forgotten by some guest. I jumped to grab the letter, feeling a wave of curiosity mixed with strange apprehension. When I opened it, I read the words written in red ink. "Love here is a lie. You are no longer safe." I froze. My heart raced. I looked around, but no one seemed to have noticed what I had read. Everyone was busy dancing or talking. What did this letter mean? What was happening here? I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was terribly wrong anymore. The place that had once seemed perfect and welcoming now gave me chills. What the hell was happening at this party? With the letter still in my hand, my body shook. I couldn't decipher what those words meant, but one thing was clear. Something was completely wrong with this party. I forced myself to think rationally, but the fear only grew. Where was Helena? Why did no one seem to know where she was? Everything around me felt increasingly distant from reality. I quickly stuffed the letter in my pocket and took a few steps toward the main hall, trying to calm my mind. The music, once soft, now felt tense, with notes intertwining in an uncomfortable way. The lights, once warm, flickered strangely. My instinct to seek answers pushed me to walk toward the corridors. Each step echoed louder than the previous one, as if the sound amplified in those long, empty hallways. I passed a few closed doors and found a dark room. What was inside? A sense of unease overtook me. I went back to the main hall, but the people no longer seemed the same. Couples smiling, yes, but their eyes were empty, as if there were no soul in them. It felt like I was watching a distorted reality. I tried to stay calm, but the anxiety was building. What was going on? I looked around again, searching for a clue, for anyone who could help me. Then, in the middle of the crowd, I saw a familiar face. It was her, Helena. But something was off. She was standing, alone, in the farthest corner of the party. She wasn't smiling like before. She looked pale, her eyes fixed on something distant. There was something in her gaze that was empty. My feet moved toward her, but before I could reach her side, someone bumped into me, causing me to lose focus. When I looked back at where she had been, Helena was gone. "Helena!" I shouted, but my voice seemed muffled by the music and the growing sense of panic that was taking over me. I ran across the ballroom trying to find Helena, but it was impossible to see anything. The party, which had once seemed like a celebration of love, was now turning into a nightmare, as if I were trapped in a maze. My heart was racing, and my breath became more difficult. Why did no one seem worried? Why wasn't anyone scared like I was? Then I realized something even more terrifying. The people around me, the other couples, seemed to be out of it. They were dancing, but their movements were stiff, as if they were being controlled by something beyond their own will. And worse, their expressions were hollow, almost as if they were dead. What was that? It was as if the very love that was supposed to be celebrated there was turning into a sinister force, a macabre illusion. I had to get out of there. Without thinking, I ran toward the exit. But when I reached the doors, I noticed they were locked. My eyes quickly scanned the windows and saw that they were also blocked, as if an invisible force was keeping everyone inside. Panic overwhelmed me. I was trapped in a nightmare, and Helena, where was she? Was she involved in all this? Did she have something to do with this heavy atmosphere? I needed to find her. I needed to understand what was happening. With my mind spinning and fear running through my veins, I returned to the corridor, determined to find answers. The shadows on the walls seemed to grow and move as I walked away from the main hall. and a distant sound, like a whisper, began to echo in the air. I looked around, but no one was there, just the walls, which now seemed to be closing in around me. The sound was like a voice, but I couldn't understand what it was saying. The feeling of claustrophobia intensified with each step, and then I noticed something very strange. The doors in the corridor, which had been closed before, were now open. There was no one inside, but as I looked down the hall, a shadow moved. It was a tall, imposing human shape. What was happening in that place? My mind was on the verge of collapsing. What should I do now? It was like I was in a place where time and space no longer made sense. The only thing I knew was that I had to leave. I had to find Helena, no matter the cost. I no longer knew where to go. Every step seemed to lead me deeper into an endless nightmare. The narrow corridor seemed to stretch infinitely before me, and the feeling of being watched never left. I couldn't trust my own senses anymore. Every shadow on the walls seemed to come alive, every sound a whisper of something that shouldn't be there. I tried to stay calm, but fear was consuming me. The tall figure I had seen at the end of the hall seemed to have vanished. I was about to turn back and return to the party, but then something made me stop. A distinct sound, an echo of footsteps, coming from an open door on my left. I cautiously approached, my heart pounding in my head. When I got closer, the door slowly opened, as if inviting someone inside. I was being pulled in, not by my own will, but by something much stronger. The room was dark, the walls made of dark wood, and the air was heavy. There was a window, but it was fogged, and I couldn't see what was on the other side. My breath quickened, and as I stepped into the room, something caught my attention. It was a piece of paper lying on the floor. I bent down to pick it up. The words on the paper were written in the same red ink. They said, "Welcome to your final moment."